Hello and welcome to this Class 8 in Maya 312. Now this is the part of the course where we're going to be talking about lighting and rendering for action shots. And I just want to quickly define what I would call an action shot. You see, in the previous classes in this course we've only dealt with objects that aren't animated. In this case we've got a little bit of action. So we've got our car here, and this is the same zombie pickup truck that we had in our first class when we talked about our lighting and rendering practices and principles for this course. But in this case, it's driving through an underground car park. Now, it doesn't look like too much right now because obviously we can't see the shaders or the textures or anything like that. But if I turn on the image plane to give you some context, you can see that the car drives up and then comes to a wobbly dead stop right in front of us. And because the car is animated and there's some action being performed, this is what I would call an action shot. Now, the lighting and rendering for something like this is a little bit different to the previous classes, just because we've got the lights over here on the screen right, over here in the back. There's lights everywhere. There's actually lights behind the camera as well. We need to make sure that they're interacting with the car properly. And if we just use the HDRI, we might miss out on some of that nice interactive lighting, because we essentially want to get something that's a bit like parallax in the lights. So there's a correlation between the distance of this light to the car, and when it drives past, we would expect the car to drive past the light. Now, you might not get the best effect by just using a HDRI, so what we want to do is project our HDRIs, remove the lights from it, and then reapply the lights as area lights to give us a really good result. So I'm going to give you a bit of a tour of the scene before we go ahead and start preparing our light sources for this class. You can see that we've got the animation of the pickup truck, and let's talk about the pickup truck just for a second. It's a pretty nice asset. It's heroed from the front, so there's not a great deal of detail in the back, and that's great because it means that it's slightly more optimized. It's live in the scene. We don't have inside of this scene any references for the objects, and just like the rest of the course, we're not using ASS files or any kind of stand-ins like that. We're just going to be using the live geometry, and hopefully it will make the scene a little bit more easy for you to get around. And it's animated over 100 frames, and the animation's pretty cool. You can really see it bouncing around on the suspension there. It's got a bunch of different materials applied to it. It's got some really nice texturing work all over, especially around the wheels and tires. And you've got this headlight that's popped out of the socket down here. Maybe that's a replacement part that they needed to find during the zombie apocalypse. And then you've got this headlight over here on the screen right. Also here inside the scene, we've got some very basic geometry for the underground car park. And I've got that on a display layer down here at the moment, and that's templated. So we'll be working with that display layer and the geometry in here just a little bit later on. We're going to need some slightly more complete geometry, certainly a roof and maybe some stuff in the back as well, to allow us to do a slightly better projection on our HDRI, because at the moment all that we've got is the ground plane and the pillars that are on the left and right. So we'll certainly want to be adding to this as we go. We've also obviously got our track camera in here, and if we look through our track camera at the subdivisions on the ground plane, we can see that that's tracking quite nicely. And that's important because we'll almost certainly want to be including a shadow for the truck on the ground as well. Okay, so let's go straight ahead to Nuke and start preparing some of our light sources for this class. So I've prepared a Nuke script here, and if you've downloaded the resources for this class, you'll be able to find the paths for all of these along with the Nuke script as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If I tap S on the keyboard, just make sure you've got that ACES OCIO config loaded up. And also for this one, we're going to be working at 25 FPS. And we're going to be working in HD 1920 1080, and our viewing LUT is set to Rec 709. Okay, so I'm just going to close out the properties for that. Let's start over here on the screen left, and this is the footage that we're working with. So we can see that the camera just tracks forwards and then tilts up just a little bit, and then our car sits right about here. And then moving along, we've got our tech plates. If you remember back to our RC car section of this course where we're doing our pack shot lighting and rendering, you'll remember that we had tech plates for that as well. Now in this case, we've got a few more just because we're going to be working with multiple HDRIs, but we still have a chrome ball, a grey ball, and our charts are included in both of these as well. And we're calling these the tech plates for Origin 1, which is closer to the back of the car park. And then we have another set which we're calling Origin 2, which is closer to the front of the car park. And then we have two lat-long HDRIs that match up with this. Origin 1 is over towards the back of the car park. You'll see how close we are to this back wall here. And when we have a look at one of the tech plates, you can see that we're near the back wall as well. Okay, and then for Origin 2, we are closer to the front of the car park here, and you can see that we have this pillar over here on the screen right. Matches the pillar over here as well in Origin 2. So we've got two sets of tech plates and we've got two HDRIs. And then also over here on the screen right, we've got something called lights. Now this is similar, yet a little bit different to some of the stuff we covered in the previous classes. In this case, we've got our light sources. Here's one of them here. If I bring the gain down, you can see that this light source is the same as some of the lights inside of our HDRI lat-long as well. All right. Now we have two of them. We've got one that's a little bit cooler and one that's a little bit warmer. And these match the colors of the ones in our plate. So for example, this one over here matches the cool color of this one. And this one over here is a little bit warmer and matches the warm color of this one. Now we've already been through in previous classes and talked about how to take a bracket of images and turn it into a HDRI for our light sources, and these follow all of the same rules. They're all square and they all have the correct color temperature. They match these HDRI plates, but at the moment the HDRI isn't calibrated to the tech plate, so we'll have to do that, and then we'll also have to apply that calibration to our lights as well over here. The idea is that we remove the lights from the HDRI, project this HDRI spherically inside of Maya, and then we use these lights, which are a much higher resolution, and apply those to area lights across the top of the ceiling so we get a nice level of interaction with the car as it drives past. So let's begin by calibrating our HDRIs. For this, once again, we're going to use the color target node. Now, if you don't know what color target is, I advise you to go back in the course and take a look at the previous classes where we talked a little bit about color target during the pack shot lighting and rendering portion of this course, and that's going to help you get a head start in this class. But for now, I'm just going to load that into Nuke. So I'm going to go to File, Insert Comp Nodes. So if you go back to those packshot classes and remember where I'm actually storing my color target, I've got this saved on my system in my Foundry folder, and once you've downloaded it, you can install it anywhere you want. We're not going to be including the color target gizmo as part of the downloads in this course, but you can certainly download it online. So definitely go back and visit that portion of the course to get your hands on the color target gizmo. So I'm just going to hit open and load that in. Now it's already connected to a few things, so I'm just going to disconnect it. And let's start with the Origin 1. So we always want to be correcting the color on our HDRIs rather than our plates. So for this, we want to apply the source to the Origin 1 HDRI, and then the target input to any one of these two plates here. I'm going to tap one on the keyboard to view this. If you remember back to the packshot portion of this course, you can see that we've got the same corner pin down here of all of our samples, and we're going to bring that over to the target, and the target's right down here on the floor. So I'm just going to move these into position, and the difference between this color chart and the color chart in the packshot portion of this course is that this color chart doesn't have a stitch line from the HDR through it, so it should be pretty good to use. So let's bring down the sample size, and I'm just going to align this with our target. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm now going to switch the current view from source to target, and we can see that here on our tripod we've got the chart already for us. So I'm going to bring our samples over and just align these to the chart. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to try and center them up a little bit on the squares as well. Okay, great. So that's looking pretty good. All that we need to do now is hit Calculate Matrix, move this over to our Origin 1, and we can unhook our color target, and let's just view this. So I'm tapping 1 on the keyboard to view this, and if we have a look at our Origin before, and our origin 1 afterwards for our HDRI, we can see that we've got quite a shift in the colors. All right, so that's looking really good. And we can also see that if we tap 1 on our keyboard for this technical plate, and then 2 on our keyboard for the color matrix of our HDRI origin 1, we can see it there matching up pretty nicely. So let's go ahead and repeat the process for our origin 2 HDRI. We can use the same gizmo. So let's bring this over and apply the source input to the origin 2 HDRI. And then we can take either one of our tech plates for origin 2 and we can apply the target there. Tap 1 on the keyboard to view our color target. And I'm just going to retarget these onto this chart. So I'm going to bring these down a little bit. Okay. Drag this one down and drag this one down. So the brown corner is in the brown corner and the white corner is in the white corner. Okay, great. And I'm going to switch our current view from target to source. And this is going to let us see our HDRI. And let's bring this down and just line this up with some of the squares. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Again, I'm going to hit Calculate Matrix. And that's going to give us a matrix for this HDRI as well. And that's it. That's all we need to do with the color target for this portion of the course. So we can remove that from our script. Now, because our HDRIs and our tech plates are all in the same environment, the transformation in color between the two of these is both pretty similar. So I'm just going to take any one of these. Let's take this one for now and copy it and paste it using Control-C, Control-V on the keyboard. And I'm going to apply it to our light sources as well, so that these light sources will be calibrated to our HDRIs still. So I'm just going to apply this here and then copy it and paste it and apply this here as well. So now we have our lights calibrated to the HDRIs, and then as it follows, it's calibrated to our tech plates, and our tech plates are the same as our live action. So let's go ahead and start writing some of these out. So I'm going to come down to our origin 1 HDRI, and I'm going to copy this, make a right node by tapping W on the keyboard. I'm going to paste that file name in, and I'm going to call that version 2. Okay. And I'm going to repeat the process for origin 2. So I'm going to copy that file name, create a right node. I'm going to paste that in, and again, call this version 2. Let's just make sure we're using an ACES compliant EXR for both of these. Okay, great. And again, just repeat the process for our two light sources. So create a right node. I'm going to copy our disk light. Paste that in here. Again, call this version 2. But in this case, underneath cool, I'm going to do underscore CC for color correct. Create a right node for our warm light. Let's copy this. I'm going to paste this in. Again, let's call this version 2. And then underneath warm, I'm going to call this CC for color correct. Okay. So now we've got a warm light, a cool light, and then two HDRIs that match our technical plates. Just before we render these out, let's make sure we've got ACES compliant EXR turned on for the light sources as well. Now I'm going to grab all of these, go to render, render selected right nodes, and hit OK. And once that's rendered out, which shouldn't take too long, I'm going to go ahead and find these files. So again, starting with the origin 1, I'm going to copy that file name, hit R on the keyboard, and just paste that in. Okay, so I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to place that right down here. Again, copy this file path, hit R on the keyboard to read that in. I'm going to paste that, hit open. So now we've got our origin 1 and origin 2 in here. Okay, and then repeat the process for our lights. Copy the file name, tap R on the keyboard to create a read node, paste this in. So that's our cool disk light, which is calibrated to our HDRIs. And repeat the process here as well. Now we have our warm light. And we can now progress our script. So we can delete these. We can delete these, and we can delete these, and move these up here. So now our script is more up to date. Okay. And we have everything inside of Nuke that we need right now. So we've got our tech plates, and we've got our HDRIs that match the tech plates, and we've got our lights that match the HDRIs, and then by connection match the tech plates, and then by connection match the footage. So when we apply all of this to our scene, our CG car should sit in quite nicely. So the next thing that we need to prepare is a proxy of our HDRIs as LDRs, which are low dynamic range images, to help with our projections in Maya. Let's just jump back to Maya for a second. Okay, so let's go over to the perspective view. At the moment, we've got the ground and we've got some pillars in here, but we're going to add in a ceiling and some walls and things like that as well. And when we start trying to do a spherical projection of our HDRIs, we don't really want to be using really high dynamic range, big EXR files, because it's just going to be slow to work with. We can use LDRs for the projection as a proxy and then swap them out later, and it's going to make everything just a little bit quicker and easier to work with. So let's jump back to Nuke. Let's come over to our HDRI Origin 1. So this is a 4K ACES compliant EXR, and manipulating this inside of Maya is just going to be a little bit heavy, so we definitely want to create a proxy of this. So the first thing we're going to do is drop down a reformat node. Okay, and underneath type we're going to switch this to scale, and we're going to bring this down to something that's a little closer to 1K. So I think 1.25 is going to be really good for us, because that's almost exactly 1K. And this is going to be a little bit easier for us to work with. So I'm going to copy that reformat node over to the Origin 2 HDRI as well. I'm going to put down a write node. And instead of writing out an EXR, I'm going to write out a JPEG proxy, and that's going to be nice and lightweight for us to work with. So I'm going to copy the file name from our Origin 1 HDRI and apply that to the read node. And just after paint, I'm going to call this proxy. Okay, and then I'm going to change the file extension to JPG. And we can even reduce the quality of this JPEG to something like 0.5, and that's going to really help us out. Our color space by default is set to matte paint. This is just a proxy, so it's not that important, but we can change this to utility sRGB texture. Okay, I'll repeat the process for our Origin 2 HDRI as well. So drop down a write node, copy the file path, and I'm going to paste that in. Change the file extension to JPEG, change the quality down to 0.5, and then after paint, I'm just going to type proxy. Okay, so underscore proxy there. I'll grab both of these, go to render, render selected write nodes, and hit OK. I'm going to read those in. And they're actually right here. Okay, so let's hit open. Let's just make sure we've got these on the right side. So this one at the Origin 1 and this one at the Origin 2. So now we can see that we've got some LDR images in here. Now, what's the difference between this image and this image? Well, this one doesn't really have any dynamic range, and it's obviously a much lower quality image. All right, whereas this one has plenty of dynamic range and is also a much higher quality image. The main difference, if I just hit R on the keyboard again to create a read node, we can see that the EXRs are nearly 50 meg, and we can see that the proxies are only 32 kilobytes. So this is going to work a lot better inside of Maya to help us with our projections straight away. So let's just close this out without creating a read node. And I'm going to move these proxies up here above the origin, just so they're not in the way for now. Okay, we can of course delete everything that we used to create those proxies. The next thing we need to do is paint the lights out. So let's do that for our Origin 1 first. And let's create a spherical transform node. And this is going to help us just flatten out the image and make the painting out of the lights just a little bit easier. Okay, so let's change our output projection to cube map. All right, so we can see that this has now unwrapped our HDRI and we have some flat surfaces to paint on. I'm going to drop down a roto paint node using tab on the keyboard and change the clip to no clip. I'm going to select the clone tool from over on the toolbar, and the idea is that we just want to paint out all of the light sources. Okay, so we've got a light source over here. Now, it doesn't matter if you come up against the edge, that's absolutely fine. And depending on how reflective your object is, or depending on how much detail you want to get in the reflections, you might want to do a slightly tidier job of painting out these lights. But on an asset like ours that isn't desperately reflective, and we're only going to be receiving mainly diffuse color from our HDRI sky dome that we're projecting onto our geometry, it doesn't necessarily have to be as tidy. So we're just going to come in and start to erase some of these lights. Okay, just like that. And then we can use maybe the blur tool as well, just to tidy up some of those edges. All right, and we can see that we've got one back here as well. So just using the clone tool to just take out these light details here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And then back here we have another one. So sampling an area nearby and painting that out. And then the same for this one back here. Just being careful not to erase too much of the pillar. You can of course use the eraser tool, just bring back some of that detail there. And maybe with the finer tool here, make the brush a little bit smaller. It's going to erase that light. Okay, so then we've obviously got a big one right in here, so let's go ahead and erase that. And we're just taking these light sources out so they don't contribute to the lighting when we project. Okay, we can utilize the blur tool just to tidy that up a little bit. And then there's one down here in the back. Okay, and then we've got a couple more, one over here on the screen right. And then a couple back here as well. Okay, so that's our lights painted out there. I'm just going to grab all of these brush strokes, come over to lifetime, and I'm going to switch from single frame to all frames. That way they don't jump on and off if we try and render from a different frame. I'm going to copy our spherical transform node and paste that down here. I'm going to connect it up. I'm going to change our projection output to lat long and our projection input to cube map. But instead of format faces, I'm going to change this to image and then view that. And this returns us to the lat long. So if we go back to our original, pressing 1 on the keyboard and then pressing 2 on the bottom spherical transform node, we can see that we've painted the lights out. Okay, so again, depending on how much reflectivity or how much detail you want to include, you can do a slightly tidier job of painting out the lights, but for our purposes, this is going to be absolutely fine. Now I'm going to repeat the process for our Origin 2 HDRI. So drop down a spherical transform node, and our input is lat long, our output is cube map. Tap 1 on the keyboard to view that. And let's create a roto paint node. Alright, change the clip to no clip. Take the clone tool and let's just repeat the process. So let's come over here all the way to the back first, and we can paint out some of these lights. Okay, just like that. And then we've got this bigger light over here, so maybe a bigger brush. Something a bit like that, and if we want to soften that off, we can just use the blur tool. Okay, and then the same thing again over here. And if we want to soften that off, we can just use the blur tool. All right, then we've got this light over here in the back. Okay, great. And then just moving around the scene, erasing these lights. We've got this one over here on the screen left. This one back here as well. This one over here behind the pillar. Okay, and then we've got these two main ones here, which are closer to the other origin. So let's erase those as well. This one up here in the back wall. One on the roof here. And then one back here too. Okay, so I think we've got all of them there. I'm going to grab all of our paint strokes here, and under lifetime switch this to all frames. Copy our spherical transform node, paste that down here, and let's just inverse this. So projection, cube map, faces to image, and we're looking for LL cross, and then we need lat long as the output. So if we view this by tapping 1 on the keyboard, and then view our original, we can see that we've painted our lights out. So just a rough paint out for the purposes of this class, but if you've got something that's more highly reflective, you can of course go in and just add in a little bit more detail or tidy up some of those paint outs. But for now, this is going to work really well for us. So that's pretty much everything prepared in terms of the HDRIs for now. The next thing that we want to do is just work a little bit with our tech plates to make working inside of Maya a little bit easier. So over on our origin 1, we've got a chrome ball and a grey ball. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, but we don't really need to be working with a separate chrome ball and grey ball plate in this case. We can actually stack the chrome ball and the grey ball by compositing two things together here, and that's going to give us a slightly easier way to work inside of Maya. So the way that we do that is we select a hero plate. So let's come over to our origin 1. We'll tap 1 on the keyboard, and we've got our chrome ball here. Now the goal is to apply the grey ball to the chrome ball plate, so we have the chrome ball and the grey ball both inside of the same technical plate. Now I always use the chrome ball as the hero plate for this. So on the grey ball I'm going to create a roto shape. Okay, I'm going to change the clip type to no clip and pre-mult to RGB. I'm going to create an ellipse. Now I'm going to come in and find that grey ball. Okay, so I just want to make the edges of this roto shape hug the edges of the grey ball. Something just like that is going to be absolutely fine. Drop down a transform node, and then straight away drop down a merge node. So the transform node is T on the keyboard and the merge node is M on the keyboard. I'm going to drop down a little dot as well, just to make this a little bit easier. Now I'm connecting the A input to the origin 1 grey ball and the B input to the chrome ball. So you can see that we've got them both on the top of each other. I'm going to hold down Control and I'm going to move our transform over the top of the grey ball. We can see that it's slightly a different size to the chrome ball. So I'm just going to scale it up ever so slightly. Just like this. Okay, and I'm just going to move it down here over the top of the tripod. Now the important thing for lighting and rendering inside of Maya is the chrome and the grey ball. We're not too concerned about the chart once we get inside of Maya for this course, so we're going to be placing the grey ball just down here. This is going to make it just a little bit easier for us to see what's going on, and it also means that we don't have to switch between the chrome ball and the grey ball plate. I'm going to repeat the process for the origin 2. I'm actually going to copy all of this, paste that down here, create a new dot by pressing the period key on the keyboard, and I'm going to hook this up to our origin 2. I'm going to view that roto node, select our ellipse, let's move that over, let's make it a bit bigger so we can see it for now. Okay, great, just going to make that a bit smaller. Okay, good. And we can manipulate the transform node as well, maybe just to make it a little bit smaller, and bring that right down here. We've actually started to manipulate the bounding boxes of these images as well, so I'm just going to drop down a crop node underneath each one. And I'm going to turn black outside off. Okay, and these at the moment are at 3K, so I'm going to reformat these down to HD. And our root format is set to 1920 by 1080, but you can always set the output format from the drop down as well. I'll copy that over. And for each one, I'm going to drop down a right node, and that's just W on the keyboard. And I'm going to select the file name from our Origin 1 grey ball here. Copy that. Paste that into its right node. I'm going to change this from grey just to balls. And I'm going to call this version 3. And we're going to write an ACES compliant EXR. And let's repeat the process for Origin 2. So copying that file name down to the right node. And instead of calling this grey, let's call this balls. And I'm going to call this version 3 and ACES compliant EXR. Okay, so I'm going to grab these two right nodes, go to render, render selected right nodes, hit OK. I'm going to tap R on the keyboard. And I'm going to read both of those in. All right, and then just to keep things tidy, we can start to remove some of these nodes in the script. So we've got our balls plate for Origin 1 and our balls plate for Origin 2. Now all that's left to do is write out our clean HDRIs. So I'm going to create a right node underneath our spherical transform and a right node underneath our spherical transform for Origin 2. Copy the file name from the Origin 1 and apply that to the right node. I'm going to remove paint, call this clean, and I'm going to version up from here as well, so I'm going to call this version 3. Let's turn on ACES compliant EXR. And let's repeat the process for Origin 2. Changing paint to clean. Calling this version 3. Write an ACES compliant EXR. Let's grab both of these. Render, render selected. And then tap R on the keyboard to read those in. And again, we can clean up our script a little bit now. And there you have it. So now we've got everything we need to start doing our projections and our lighting for our action shot. We've got our two light sources, which are color calibrated to our HDRIs. Our HDRIs have now got the lights removed. We've got some proxies that still include the lights, but these are what we're going to use to help set our projections in Maya before we replace it with the clean HDRIs, and then add the lights on top of them. We've got our condensed ball plates, which are going to help us orientate our projections and check everything. And then we've got, of course, our footage. So thanks for joining this class. In the next class, we're going to be picking things up in Maya to assemble our scene.